Hey, Walter Sorrells back with another Knife Makers Friday 5. Today, some thoughts about making tools for your shop. So today I'm going to give you some hints about how to make tools for your shop, maybe more efficiently, but also just some general reflections about tools and tool making. Now, the probably most obvious question that people always have is whether I should make or buy a tool, particularly expensive tools. A lot of guys make their own belt grinders or maybe hydraulic forged presses, you know, these really expensive tools. I've actually talked in some other Friday Fives about that kind of decision, so that's not really what we're going to be talking about today. The main thrust of what we're going to be talking about today is really kind of a whole bunch of other little questions about tool making, the practicalities of doing it, design philosophy, stuff like that. So to that end, I've got a whole bunch of old tools that I've made here in my shop. Actually, some of them are not old, some of them are almost brand new. But anyway, I'll be talking about a whole bunch of these different tools, why I made them, how I made them, some stuff like that. All right, so let's get started here. And I'll mention this tool first because this is kind of what got me thinking about this particular subject. This is a little vise for knife makers to help you drill handle material. I'm making this for the guys at Pop's Knife Supply. I've made a whole bunch of them, just shipped them out, so they won't be able to sell them to you like today, but probably within the next week or so they'll have them on sale. And anyway, so I put a whole bunch of time and effort into making this tool, and it sort of, for me, straddles this line of making or buying something because, you know, I'm making it for other people to buy. Anyway, the point of all that is that I've been thinking about tool making. So the first tool that I'm going to talk about is this tool right here, one of the first tools that I ever made for my shop. This is probably about 25 years old. It is a saya chisel or scabbard chisel. It's a very specialized chisel that's used in making Japanese sword scabbards. There's just no place to buy them domestically, and so I had to make my own. Originally, this one about 25 years ago. At the time, I didn't even have a handle on it, and I probably made 10 or 15 scabbards with this thing, just using this, pushing this into my hand. And at a certain point, I was like, okay, I got to have a handle here. It's just kind of uncomfortable to use, but I didn't want to squander much time making it, and so I made this incredibly crude, crummy, stupid-looking handle. I mean, you just look at it and you're like, what kind of moron made this thing? My assumption was I'm going to do this afternoon, and then next time I need to use this tool, I'll actually go and I'll make a good handle. It'll be really nice and something that's sort of a keeper. Well, 25 years later, I still have this same ugly thing on here, and it works great. So anyway, that leads me to. Oh, by the way, I actually make these and sell these kind of tools now. They look nice and they have turned handles. Let me go grab one right here. Well, anyway, I don't have one here right this minute. But anyway, this leads me to my next tool, which is this little, very simple actually tool right here. Consists of a little plastic piece and this wooden shoe here. And I'll actually, I previously recorded an explanation over there of what this does. I'll let myself butt in here and tell that particular story. I make these Japanese scabbard chisels, saya chisels is what they're called. And it's a very specialized chisel. They've got wooden handles. I turn the wooden handles by hand. They're not made on a machine, and so the size of the handles is slightly different. So I wanted to be able to bore holes in the handle and do them nice and concentrically. And doing that by hand was sort of tricky. So I wanted to come up with something that would self-center and allow me to drill each and every time exactly in the center of this thing. So knowing that the dimensions, because these are hand-turned, are not going to be exactly the same, I came up with a little wooden tool. It's just super simple. And this seat's in the bottom, and then you put this little piece that I made on my CNC machine over here. It goes in this centered slot, and you can push it down. It locks it in there, and it's locked in completely concentrically so that I can do 10 or 15 handles at a time, and every single one of them, once I get this properly centered, once I get the drill bit properly centered, every single one of them is going to go in perfectly every single time. Fun little tool, is a fun little design. I've been thinking about it for a good while, and there were a bunch of little mechanical issues that I couldn't quite sort out, and this morning I was like, oh, I think I know how to do it, and this is the result. It took me probably less than an hour to make this. You know, there's nothing sophisticated about this. I just made it out of a piece of wood. Of course, I could have done this out of some really expensive material, but for this, wood is perfectly good, and it really solves the problem. So I made it once, now it's done. Real quick here, guys, if you've been enjoying all the free content I've been offering on YouTube for the past 15 years, yep, you heard that right, it's been almost 15 years now, and you want to give back to the channel, there's a way. It's called Patreon. All of my Patreon supporters at any pledge level get plans to most of my builds, plus other bonuses for higher pledge levels, plus you get the good feeling of helping out the channel. So help us, help you. Link in the cards and description. Okay, so another cool tool, turning back to my Japanese sword days. I still make Japanese swords to some degree, but it's really a tiny piece of my life as a knife maker now. But this is one of the tools that I'm kind of most happy about. As far as I know, I invented this tool. I call it a habaki slammer. So the habaki is a little copper collar at the base of a Japanese sword. It helps it so that you can put the guard on and all that stuff and everything doesn't fall off. So anyway, it involves bending this copper, cold forging it into a sort of U shape. And so I made this little design for doing that, and a whole bunch of little punches that punch into there and help you make the habaki. It's just a bunch of pieces of 1095 that I bent, I forged and then welded together. But it works great. And to me, this is the reason that I'm proud of this tool. It's super ugly. It's not interesting, in any mechanical way. But the reason that I find it really cool is because I ran into a problem of how to make these things. I'd seen people making these using methods that I couldn't seem to reproduce and get good results. And I thought, okay, well, what would be the ideal way to solve this problem? And this little tool is the result. So, footnote on that, to me, the most interesting place to make tools is when you run into a problem in your shop that you can't solve. Maybe something is not, you're having a quality problem, or there's just something that's bugging you. Like, I'm trying to do this thing and it just keeps not working. A lot of times there may be some tool out there that you could go out and spend 50 cents or $2,000 or whatever the number is that'll solve your problem. But sometimes you just look around and you think, nobody solved this problem. And to me, that's the most interesting tool making opportunity, where you can come up with something that nobody has done before. And I've actually, over the course of my knife making career, I've come up with some things that I'm pretty proud of, and this is really one of the most conspicuous examples of it, because it solves a problem nobody seemed to have solved before, at least not that way. There are a lot of other tools. I mean, this is a good example where it's just a spin on something that other people have already done in the past. I think that this offers a bunch of improvements to some of the existing designs, and allows it to actually be used for some things that maybe we didn't even really think about when we first decided to make this. When I say we, I'm talking about me and the guys at Pops. But, like I say, this is kind of a spin on something that somebody else had already thought up. This, on the other hand, you know, this is a completely new thing. This, so far as I can recall, nobody had done before. And so solving that kind of problem is incredibly satisfying. There are other things, you know, like I said, making a hammer, okay, it's fun to make a hammer, but I'm not solving a problem somebody hadn't solved, you know, 5,000 years ago. Hammers have been around a long time. Here's another little tool that is kind of my own little invention, though I'm sure plenty of other people have done something kind of similar. The idea here, it's a lock face gauge. So I had been, for probably about 2 years, I made folding knives. I've since gotten out of the folding knife business. Anyway, I won't get into all that, but the bottom line is here that the face on a liner lock folder is a very, very precision piece of that mechanical system. If it's not right, you have big problems. And so this was designed to measure exactly how I had made that lock face and to allow me to dial it in so that each one would be exactly the same and would work exactly the same. And you could rotate this thing and the little gauge needle would register exactly how much I had ground off of this face. A lot of thought went into this, a lot of work, and it only sort of worked. So sometimes this is one of the downsides of saying, oh, I'm going to solve this problem and make a tool that's going to solve the problem. Sometimes the reason that there's not an existing tool to solve that problem is because a lot of other smart people have thought about it and come up dry, and maybe you will too. So you never know at the beginning of the process whether you're going to end up with something that really solves a problem, like this did, or something like this that only kind of sort of did it. I brought out this right here, and I have kept it uncleaned. I didn't do anything to it before I brought it out to give you an illustration of the kind of thing that, I mean, I put a reasonable amount of effort into this thing. I don't even remember what it was for. It has something to do with drilling holes and securing this thing. I don't even remember. But, I put a bunch of work into this, and it clearly did not solve whatever the problem was that I was trying to solve, because it's been sitting there literally collecting dust for 10 years or so. So you're not always a winner when you make your own tools. Some other cool things here. I wish that I had the original version of this. This is made for, it's a tool and die set. So this is the tool and this is the die here. That's intended for making kashiras, which are the little butt cap that goes on the end of a Japanese sword. It's cold forged, and I think that the Japanese guys typically forge the thing more or less by hand on a, with a hammer. But I wanted to make a little die set. So the original version of this that I made was actually wood, and I used a piece of rosewood or something as the die. It worked, but it wasn't very robust, and it was prone to splitting and stuff like that. So I replaced the original die with HDPE plastic, which is the kind of plastic that they use in cutting boards. And in fact, I think I just harvested it from an old cutting board in my house. I don't think that I even bought commercial HDPE. And that worked okay, but eventually I thought, well, I should actually make one from steel. So this is what I made, and this is sort of version 3.0. I probably made this 15 years ago. If I were going to make it today, I've got a CNC machine back there. I would design the thing so that I could have a progressive die where you put the piece of copper in there and you hit it one time here and then move it to a little die that's shaped closer to where you're aiming. You slam it again there a couple times, move it to the next one, and it'll more or less perfectly form that final shape. but I don't make these things anymore, so I've never bothered doing that. Along the same lines, this little thing is for making fuchis, which are the companion to the kashira that this little goodie is for. So this is a stake, so this is made to go into the hardy hole of my anvil, and then this allows me to sort of cold forge this piece, which is actually made in a completely different way from the kashira. This is actually brazed together from a little loop of copper, and then a top's brazed onto it. Whole different thing, and so a different tool made for that. This is a completely, again, it's all rusty, haven't used it in years, but this is a completely unoriginal idea. I'm sure that if you went into the workshop of a Japanese guy who was making these kinds of fittings, there'd be something exactly like this sitting in there. Along those lines, another fun little thing, this is a plane. You can see that the sole of the plane is curved. In the Western world, they'd call this a chair maker's plane because it was for planing out the bottoms of chairs. This one I was using for planing the interior surface of scabbards for Japanese swords. You know, there are very few of these kinds of things commercially made, and so I decided to make one that was exactly the right radius for the kind of things that I was making. This was a fun project, but again, nothing particularly original about it. Here's something that's kind of cool. Again, a not super original design. These I actually make for Pop's Knife Supply too. I've got a whole batch of them here. And there've been, it's basically a little magnetized thing for holding blades and grinding blades, specifically for tapered tang knives, but you could use it for a lot of other things. There have been plenty of magnetic holding devices for a long time. The innovation for this is that it has a little piece of micarta that pokes out that you can stick into holes on the tangs of your knives and hold onto them a little bit better than just a plain flat surface. So I didn't really come up with the original idea for this. Some of the Pops guys did, and so all I did was really refine it to make it, you know, maybe better in a couple of ways, but also just to make it more manufacturable. Like I said, I'm making them in quantity for these guys. And so one of the things, a shop tool that I had to make was, well, I guess you could say it's an assembly jig or an assembly fixture. So the idea here is you got these magnets that go into holes in here, and the magnets will flip over and go into weird orientations by magnetically affecting each other, unless you have a little fixture that has magnets inset in the bottom, and then you can put this thing on here. I don't have any of the little blank bottoms, but you can put it on here, and all the magnets will orient correctly because I have magnets inset into this thing that I made on my CNC machine. Without this, assembling this would have taken more time to put these darn magnets into these holes than everything else that I did on this combined. This kind of thing, again, I think it's rewarding just as, you know, something to do. Hey, I made this, it's cool. But it's also something that's a big time saver. Okay, so wrapping things up. A couple things about these tools. One is the make or buy question, and obviously, this is just a sort of rational thing. If it's going to take X amount of time and your time is worth X amount of money, maybe sometimes it makes sense to make something instead of buying. But that's not a super fun question to answer. So let me talk about questions that I consider to be a little bit more fun. So one big question is, how refined should a tool be? You know, this is something that I'm selling, and so aesthetics kind of plays into it. I want it to not look crappy, at least, and so I have to put a certain amount of time into finishing and stuff. This thing, even before it was covered with cobwebs and dirt and rust, there was no intention of making this look good. And that's just a question that you have to answer for yourself. Some people, they're doing this for fun, and they're making a particular tool, and so you know, should it be a super refined thing? I'm trying to look for something that I have here that's super refined. Well, you know, obviously these kind of things. A lot of effort's been put into the aesthetics or whatever. Is there a right answer to how much effort you should put into making a tool look really nice? No, that's a question for you to answer. And like everything in knife making, I encourage you to think about it and then decide, hey, is this effort that I want to spend or not? There's no right answer. So here's another question or thing to keep in mind, and that is context. You know, I'm a professional knife maker. I have to think about every decision I make in terms of whether it's going to put food on my table or whether it's going to impoverish me. If you're a hobbyist, you should not be thinking about that at all. You know, you should be thinking in terms of what's fun. But, you know, one of the dirty little secrets of knife making and most other artistic careers is that you're always juggling with this what's fun versus what's going to put food on the table. And there's no formula for it because sometimes you do something for fun and it turns out to be profitable or, you know, a good business move or whatever, but you didn't know that up front. You really just were following your gut. So in my case, the reality is, even though I have to think about this in commercial terms because, you know, I have a wife, I have, you know, a kid, I have a mortgage, you know, these are things that grown-ups have to think about. At the same time, most days, I'm also trying to think about, well, what would be kind of fun here? What's going to be satisfying? And that's a balance that, you know, there's just no simple answer to. So another question, this kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier, how good is good enough? You know, do you want your tool to be this or do you want it to be this? Now, to some degree, the answer is dependent on the kind of tools that you have. You know, I've got a CNC machine, I got a lathe, I got a, I got a lot of tools now. When I started 25 years ago, I had virtually nothing. I've got a forge over there, that's another tool that I made. It is the most horrible, crummy looking thing you could possibly imagine, but it's actually very functional. But part of the reason it looks so crappy is that when I was making it, I had like a screwdriver and a welding torch or something. I don't even remember what I had, but I had almost nothing. And so the result was necessarily going to be constrained by the fact that I didn't have any tools. But it's always worth asking the question, do I want to pour more energy into this tool to make it look fancy or look refined? Do I want to paint it or whatever? And again, there's no answer to that, but it's worth thinking about it. You know, I know people who sometimes, because they're sort of obsessive people, probably spend more time making something perfect than they really mean to because they're just so obsessive-minded. But then they end up spending all this time on something and not focusing maybe on what the purpose of that tool was in the first place. It was supposed to save them time, and they just dumped acres of time into this thing, and it doesn't necessarily pay off. So I feel like you should actually look at these things and say, you know, why am I doing this? And if the reason for doing it is just, hey, trying to have fun here, that's an answer in and of itself, and you should go with that. But if you're trying to save time, always be asking yourself the question, am I just throwing time away by making something that's supposed to be saving me time in the future? All right, so let me circle back to what I think is the single most satisfying type of tool, and just a general point here, which is if you run into problems with something not coming out the way that you want it to, maybe the problem's you. But a lot of times, there's actually a tool that's going to fix the problem. It may not be about your skill level or whatever at all. It really might be you just don't have a tool that addresses that very, very specific problem that you're trying to figure out. And so making the tool yourself, it might just be the solution. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and keep on making those knives. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and make sure that you click on that bell so you get notified of all the latest videos. Want to buy a knife from me? Check out my modern blades at tacticsarmory.com. Digging the channel? You can support our video making efforts on Patreon. You know, I've been banging away on these videos for like 10 years. So I hope you'll show some love for all that hard work. Link in the cards and descriptions. Finally, if you're interested in making Japanese swords, check out my full line of Japanese sword videos where I show how to forge Japanese swords as well as how to polish them and how to make fittings, handles, and scabbards. WalterSorrellsBlades.com.